What's up, you guys? Welcome to today's video. I'm going to be talking about addiction today, but more specifically than that, I'm going to be talking about the rates of overdoses. I'm going to be talking about my own experience with overdose and naloxone and what it really means to be an addict. And I'm going to dive in as deeply as I can without boring you guys to death on how addiction affects the brain, how we're wired, and what is voluntary or involuntary. I am not a doctor. I am just a chick with a camera who has studied psychology for 4 years. I currently have a bachelor's degree, but I'm still learning. I'm also an addict in recovery. I have been sober for 8 years, and so often I get the question, well, if you've been sober 8 years, aren't you recovered? Aren't you done? And the fact of it is, no, I'm not. My brain chemistry responds differently to certain things, and depression is my biggest trigger. So we're gonna go over that. We're gonna go over how my brain is hardwired and how I view addiction and how I think that what we are doing in America to treat addiction is fundamentally so incorrect. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So let's first talk about addiction being a choice or disease, because a lot of times people want to just assume that everything that they're doing is by choice. Our behaviors are by choice. We are not forced to do anything. I'm moving my hand right now because I want to move my hand, or I'm looking up because I want to, and everything I do is voluntary. I am controlling my body. I'm controlling my movements. So I want to branch off of that idea that everything that we do on our own free will and we do by choice. What's interesting is a lot of times that is not true. So, have you ever been driving a car and you're driving and maybe you're listening to the music and you kind of zone out in your thought and you're driving down the road and before you know it, you've reached your destination or your home. You pull into your driveway and you're like, whoa, I kind of zoned out for a while. The brain has something so unique and so amazing called autopilot. It's not really called autopilot, but it's in the striatum, which is a piece of the brain that controls something like autopilot. Now, it seems crazy for a human being to run on autopilot, and I'm sure you guys have made jokes where you say that your brain is on autopilot, but it is. The interesting thing is your brain can have an autopilot. Now, driving home and not realizing that you were driving for so long, or you're zoning out on the highway and you missed your exit, the brain does that because the brain is hardwired to do what you've done most often. And when you're doing a behavior like that, like driving a car, your brain recognizes what you were doing and it kind of can function on that. It can function on memory and how many times we've done that. Your brain knows what you're doing. Your brain knows that you're driving a vehicle. And it's interesting when we talk about addiction, we talk about being compulsive and using drugs. Like I said, it's so easy to say like, oh, that person is just choosing to do that, but are they really? Are they really choosing to do that? Or is their brain on autopilot? Have they done a lot of damage to the striatum, which is the part of the brain which controls certain neurological systems like autopilot or compulsion? So if they have been using a substance for some time, their brain can almost function on autopilot and it reverts back to what it's done most often. So just another example here, if you're sitting on the couch and you're eating a bowl of Doritos and you have like a bowl of Doritos sitting there, and you're just snacking and watching TV, not really paying attention, but it's like your brain knows, pick up another chip, and another chip, and another chip, and before you know it, you ate the entire bowl of chips sitting there. I do the same thing, but that's the same, it's the same automatic reward system that you get through eating, you know? There have been so many times, and I'm sure you guys are with me, that when we're just really hungry, maybe we skipped lunch, it's been a long day, we are just so hungry and we're getting ready to meet our friends for dinner. We're just like, oh man, when I get to Uncle Julio's, I'm getting those fajitas, I am just so hungry. And then you pull up to the restaurant and you start to salivate because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get these freaking fajitas and they're gonna be so bomb, I'm gonna get tableside guac, and you're already almost tasting the food before it's in your mouth. Sit down, you wait and you order the fajitas, you smell the food all around you, and finally those fajitas come and they taste so good because you were so hungry. Similarly, that's how drugs affect the brain, is that we kind of obsess over it until we get it, and we're compulsive in our behavior in order to get it. And the reward system acts on so many different things. It can respond to food, sex, normal human behaviors such as eating and having sex. that reward system releases oxytocin. That's why when you hug your loved one and you hold on to them for 30 to 45 seconds, that releases oxytocin in your brain and you feel comfortable and maybe safe. That same feeling is what I got from heroin. Heroin was my boyfriend. I wrapped myself up in this substance, and maybe that seems so far-fetched to have people understand, but the reality of it is that was how my brain reacted. It was like I was hugging someone that was so warm, and I felt a release of oxytocin, and I felt great. What causes a person to actually use this substance in the first place? Why do they do it? A large number of people are prescribed opioids and prescribed this medication from a doctor. 55% of people get a drug from a friend or a relative. And I remember growing up in class and hearing, don't just say no to drugs. And we would have these DARE classes where people would say, just say no to drugs. But no one is just going around to 13 and 14-year-olds and offering them drugs on the street. And before you bomb the comment section and say, yes, it happened to me, that's not what studies show. That's not what is typical. That's not what the data says. And numbers do not lie. So overwhelmingly, people get it from a family member or a friend. Now, a lot of times, people are unknowing drug dealers, meaning a normal, and by normal I mean not sick person, myself being sick as an addict, a normal, healthy person would get a prescription to pain meds, maybe need them for a day or two, and then heal from basic things. But what I meant when I said an unknowing drug dealer is that you maybe don't take the drugs, so they sit in your medicine cabinet. And then I come over and I use your bathroom, and I see them in there and I take them. That is the most common example of how people get prescription pain medication. A lot of times it's not even prescribed to them, it's prescribed to someone near them and they take it. I really want to talk about loneliness, because loneliness is as toxic as a substance. Loneliness is as toxic as binge drinking alcohol for 20 years. It affects the brain in such a negative way that when a person is lonely, they just don't want to feel that anymore. And we're seeing that a lot with social media. This is the age of connection on social media. But interestingly enough, we're all alone together. Because if you go to any restaurant pre-COVID, these restaurants are packed with people and their phone is always on the table. It's just sitting there. If it dings, they pick it up and they read the text. And if you watch, children have tablets and adults are on their phones and everyone is together, but they're alone. And social media is supposed to be to share things, but really it's to compare. And social media actually makes us more alone. In a world where we are so connected, so many of us are alone. Social isolation, many would argue, is torture. It affects the brain in such a powerful way that we are desperate to seek anything that makes us not feel lonely anymore. And that's where we see codependency. Now, as I've shared on this channel many times, I was very codependent to my ex. I felt like my happiness was tied to him, and I was not happy if I was not with him, and I could not live without him, and I was very codependent with my ex-boyfriend. And there was no way I could live without him, and that is what my brain told me. My only happiness is with this person, my only happiness is with a substance, and they were both interwoven together. I've relapsed many times, and that is not an uncommon thing. In fact, 59% of people relapse in the first week into sobriety, and 80% relapse in the first month. I've relapsed more times than I could possibly tell you. So back to being compulsive, I would try to relearn that compulsive behavior to seek out that chemical that is going to blast my reward system, give me a huge release of oxytocin and dopamine, and it's gonna make me feel good. I was so desperate for that, but I didn't understand the damage that it was doing to my brain. Nonetheless, my entire life was controlled by a substance. Is that a choice, or is it a disease? Is it a choice that now my brain is hardwired and rewired to seek out a substance that makes me feel not alone? Now, if you are constantly taking a substance that is blasting your brain's reward system, after a while, your brain says, oh, I don't need to work that hard on that because you're just gonna give me something and I can just sit here and do it. It would be like me sitting on the couch and you giving me like 600 bucks a week, and then I'm like, why do I have to go to work? You're just gonna bring cash to me, I'll just chill here. That's kind of what the reward system in our brain does. It's like, oh, why fire up? You're just gonna give it to me for free. Over time, when we're blasting that reward system and our reward system is ping, 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 ping chemically, our body naturally doesn't make the dopamine required to be happy. It is a scientific fact that those struggling with addiction have lost free will. They no longer have a choice. That isn't how they behave. That isn't what they do. They no longer have a choice. So, to answer my previous question simply, is addiction a disease or a choice? It is a disease because of the way that the chemistry in the brain reacts to a drug, especially over time. Addicts are compulsive by nature. In the same way that we sit there and we eat the Doritos one by one by one, it's the same way that addicts compulsively use drugs. They have lost free will. So addiction has been studied for a very long time, and the data and the research and the science tells us that without a doubt addiction is a disease, but saying that sentence has already triggered someone. I have upset plenty of people on my channel before, but saying addiction is a disease really upsets people because they feel as though that it is not. It is a choice because they're picking up a substance. But at a certain point, your brain chemistry changes. And because of the way that we view addiction, it makes it very difficult for us to treat addiction because a lot of times people are like, shouldn't have chose drugs. It's so much more complex than that. The human mind is much more complex than that. So I would challenge anyone and everyone to do their own research. Please don't take my word for it. I'm sure I've misspoke already in this video because I do it all the time. I'm sure I've said something wrong because that's just who I am at this point. But if you think it's a choice and you shame someone because of that, just research it. We are in the age of information, and so often I see people that are hateful and ignorant for no reason, or they believe that their own personal experience with dealing with an addict is all. I overdosed on heroin, and I was revived with Narcan, and when I woke up, I was pissed. I wasn't happy to be alive. I wasn't, oh my God, thank you so much, paramedic. I was shocked. I was terrified. I was on a cold sidewalk. I was on a cold sidewalk in a city that I didn't know with strangers in my face asking me, Jessica, are you okay? Jessica, do you know what day it is? I remember trying to open my eyes and everything around me was blurry, and I was very much in pain, and I was very upset. And it wasn't even in that moment that I was able to comprehend what had just happened to me. I thought that they had given me something that sent me into withdrawal because I was in an enormous amount of pain. It felt like every bone in my body was breaking. I don't know how long I was laying down on that dirty sidewalk. I only know that my last memory was shooting up in a bathroom in a really disgusting bar, and then nothing, complete blackness, and then waking up on a sidewalk with strangers in my face asking me what day it was. And I thought, you should have just let me die. Whatever happened, whatever it was, you should have just let me die. I didn't even know that I had overdosed that day. It took me a couple of days to wrap my head around the entire event. I just woke up scared and in pain. The interesting thing about Narcan, or naloxone, which is the key ingredient in Narcan that reverses opioid overdose, is that in tests, when they give that drug to a healthy person, they then have a really difficult time connecting to the people they already know, and they feel isolated and alone. Just by giving them naloxone, it makes it hard for them to feel loved and to feel like they are in a safe environment with people they already know and love. That would be like you giving me naloxone now and me coming home to my family and not really feeling like I loved them, and feeling alone in my own home, feeling alone in a crowded room. And the ironic thing about that is exactly how I felt on heroin. I felt completely alone. I felt alone at all times. It didn't matter if I was in a club, if I was in a bar, if I was in a grocery store, a restaurant, or if I was with my codependent boyfriend, I still felt alone. I had such a difficult time creating lasting bonds while in addiction, and that boiled over into sobriety. So we have to train our brain to relearn and re-hardwire into healthy behaviors. We have to heal the parts of our brain that have been severely damaged with drugs. We have to relearn those behavioral patterns, and even when we do so, even when we remove substances from our life, the interesting thing about the psychology behind addiction is that if you are physically alone and you don't have a support group, it's almost like you're still using, and I don't want to broadly say that, but the way that the brain reacts to isolation and loneliness, it's a very damaging thing to be alone. And loneliness is what causes so many bad decisions, because when we are lonely, we just want to feel not lonely. For a very long time after I got sober, my last time I was in jail, and I found it difficult to feel normal human emotions, sad, angry. I felt as though I was empty, and I would sit at these tables in the day room of this jail feeling completely empty. I can't laugh, I can't smile, I can't cry. I just sat there almost like I was on autopilot, almost like I didn't know how to respond, almost like I was an empty shell of a person. After the withdrawal had gone away, I still had an imbalance in my brain and I still didn't know how to feel good. Studies have shown that in those moments after someone gets sober, that is the most difficult because chemically our brain is imbalanced. So we want to bring those levels back to normal, and we want to feel good, and we want our reward system to work just to make us laugh, to make us not feel lonely. And a lot of times, if it's not a genuine connection with another person, or it's not an act of service, or you're not doing something that you feel purposeful in, you relapse. And that is what is so key to addiction. So the way that we treat addiction in this country is fundamentally so flawed because it's against the law. We in America have a system in place where we take someone suffering from a disease and we put them in a box. We lock them up in jails and prisons. We isolate them. Many are abused. They serve time in prison, they get out and they're a felon, and we further disconnect them from society by telling them they can't have a job, by telling them that we won't rent to you. We further disconnect them from society. We forever shame them. We put them down. I am called a junkie on this platform every single day, and every single day I get up and I sit in front of this camera and I make videos anyway. But studies show that I am rare. It breaks my heart that only 10% of addicts receive treatment. The way that I got sober is not what is going to get everyone sober. My reasoning behind getting sober is so much different than yours. The thing that got me sober was I was pregnant in prison. So I don't recommend that everyone go out and get pregnant and go to prison. That's obviously a horrible thing to say. So my path is different. So if I'm a different person and I chose drugs for a different reason than maybe you did, and my journey is different, then why do we think we can treat them all the same? And that in this country overwhelmingly is lock them up in jail, arrest them. That is how we are dealing with the opioid crisis. And currently over 100 people die in this country every single day from an overdose. But that statistic was in 2016, and I'm sure it's worse. The way that we think about addiction is wrong. The judgment and the shame around addiction, the stigma around addiction is so horrible that so many people, if revived with Narcan, wake up feeling the same thing I felt. Mad, just let me die. Imagine just for 1 second being so hopeless, being so lonely, being so depressed, being so out of your mind that all you want to do is die because you think that is the only peace you will ever get is in your death. That is not an uncommon feeling. That is not an uncommon state of mind. The way we view addiction is wrong. We need to treat addiction like you would any other disease. And when we start to do that, when we start to actually see addiction for what it is, which is a disease and a literal crisis in our country, only then are we going to be able to start helping people. I spoke in the beginning about relearning behavioral patterns and compulsion and autopilot and addiction, loneliness, and all of that is located in our striatum. So it would make sense that we relearned those compulsive behaviors. And once we relearn that, our brain is going to not only revert back to what we were doing most often, like driving. If we relearn what we were doing most often when we stopped doing drugs, then it would make sense that our brain would learn that using drugs is no longer a compulsion, and we should be able to be cured, right? Wrong. We need both the relearning the compulsive behavior as well as meaningful social connection. And there's a very powerful TED Talk where it talks about amazing experiences like Rat Park. The general concept of it is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection, because we need to heal the brain that is responsible for compulsive behaviors. We need to heal that piece of our brain, but we also need to connect meaningfully with other people. That other piece is so crucial in solving addiction and bringing more people into recovery, whatever that looks like for them. That component is so important. But so often addicts are told just stop using drugs. If it was as easy as turning off the autopilot and stopping with the compulsive behavior, if it was so easy to do that, we would. It would be like telling Billie Eilish, who struggles with Tourette syndrome, to stop ticking. Just stop moving your shoulder. But it is an involuntary motion. There's a lot of really interesting things about Tourette syndrome and addiction as well, so I'm not gonna bore you with the science behind it, but a lot of what we do is not voluntary. It is involuntary, and it is a compulsive behavior. Fundamentally, what we need to cure addiction, we need positive, meaningful social interaction to be the new compulsive behavior, because when we turn to a person, or we turn to a group, or we turn to our support team instead of a substance, we are more likely to succeed in recovery. Now, there are so many different paths to recovery that are all valid, that are all amazing, that are all helping. Recovery is not a one-size-fits-all. Abstinence, which is the path that I have chosen myself, is not a one-size-fits-all miracle cure to addiction. Take away the substance and she's going to be cured. Nope. So what path is going to work for you? And the cool thing is we have so many options now. You can choose abstinence, you can choose medically assisted treatment, you can choose psychedelics. There's so much research with that right now. You can choose so many different things to help you have a healthy, more happy life. But I firmly believe that it all comes down to mental health. If we take care of our mental health, then we're going to be healthier. If we have meaningful social interaction, we're going to be healthier and happier people. It is complex, but I'm very glad that at least we have those options and at least we're talking about it. We have a very long way to go in solving addiction. I think the first step is getting Narcan in everyone's hands that we possibly can, because you never know when you're going to see someone that is overdosing. Now, I know that this might piss some people off, but I think it's very important that we have funding for naloxone or Narcan to be distributed on the streets to stop an overdose whenever we possibly can. The cool thing is paramedics and police officers are not the only ones that have access to that anymore, and we need to start with education, teaching what addiction does to our brain, how it affects us both chemically, socially, how psychologically damaging it is to use drugs. I don't know if my videos help. I don't know if any of this made sense or if I'm just a rambly mess like always, but I really hope that this video informed you of something you didn't know. Maybe you learned something today. Maybe I misspoke and we can laugh about it in the comment section down below. If you guys want to see more videos like this, please let me know. And as always, I love you guys. Stay safe, stay sober, whatever that looks like to you. And I will see you in my next one.